Pam Bondi walked into that courtroom, facing a judge who didn't take her seriously. By the time she was done, his smirk was gone, and so was the defense's confidence. The heavy doors of the Hillsborough County Courthouse groaned open as Pam Bondi stepped inside. The grand, historic building stood as a monument to justice, its towering columns and intricate carvings whispering stories of past battles fought within its halls. She walked with a purpose, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor, each step measured, deliberate. The air carried the scent of old paper, musty law books, and the faint bitterness of stale coffee. A cocktail of exhaustion, ambition, and long hours spent chasing justice. This case was different. The stakes weren't just high, they were towering. An influential corporate giant stood accused of fraudulent practices, and they had brought in the best legal defense money could buy. Their attorneys were seasoned, ruthless, and accustomed to crushing opposition before it had a chance to breathe. They had the resources, the experience, the connections. What they didn't have, however, was Pam Bondi's tenacity. At the front of the courtroom, Judge Richard Calloway sat perched on his elevated bench, the weight of authority resting on his shoulders. His silver-rimmed glasses slid down the bridge of his nose as he thumbed through a thick stack of legal briefs. His expression was unreadable, but Pam caught it, that slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. A smirk, subtle, but there. Amusement. Skepticism. The kind of condescension she had encountered more times than she cared to count, reserved for attorneys who were either too young, too ambitious, or in her case, both. Pam ignored it. She had long since learned that proving herself was part of the game. She adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, squared her shoulders, and strode forward with the quiet confidence of someone who had done her homework. On the opposing side, the defense team was already seated, their presence dominating the courtroom like a well-orchestrated machine. They had the polish of Wall Street lawyers, their suits crisp, their expressions carefully composed. At the center of it all sat Martin Holloway, the lead defense attorney, a man known for his ruthless cross-examinations and uncanny ability to twist a case in his client's favor. He exuded the kind of confidence that came from years of winning, from knowing the system would bend if you pressed hard enough. Pam met his gaze, unwavering. She could almost hear the unspoken words hanging in the air between them. "You don't belong here. Watch me." The court clerk cleared his throat, signaling the start of proceedings. The murmur of the gallery hushed as everyone settled into their seats. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "Court is now in session." Judge Calloway straightened in his chair, his presence commanding the room. "We're here today in the matter of the state of Florida versus Holloway Enterprises," he said, his tone bored, as if this were just another routine case. "Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" Pam took a breath, steady and deep. "The prosecution is ready, Your Honor." Martin Holloway barely looked up from his papers. "The defense is ready." The judge nodded, glancing between them before settling his gaze on Pam. "Ms. Bondi, let's get to it." She stepped forward, her voice firm but controlled. "Your Honor, the state intends to prove that Holloway Enterprises engaged in systematic fraudulent activities, deceiving not only consumers but investors as well. We will provide evidence that documents were falsified, contracts were manipulated, and financial reports were deliberately misleading." Holloway didn't flinch, but Pam caught the way his fingers tightened around his pen. Judge Calloway leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "That's a strong accusation, Counselor. I hope you have the evidence to back it up." "I do." She turned, walking toward the jury box, letting the silence stretch just long enough to build anticipation. "In fact, I have more than enough." A rustle of papers from the defense table. Holloway's team was shifting, recalculating. Pam allowed herself the smallest smile before continuing. "Let's start with Exhibit A." The bailiff stepped forward, handing her the first set of documents. She held them up for the court to see. "These are internal emails from Holloway Enterprises. In them, executives discuss how to conceal financial losses from stakeholders. You'll notice the phrase, and I quote, "creative accounting" used more than once. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Calloway's smirk was nowhere to be seen now. He leaned forward, interest piqued. "Continue." Pam nodded, knowing she had the room. Knowing that, for the first time that morning, the defense wasn't as confident as they had been. And she was just getting started. Pam was neither. But she knew exactly how the judge viewed her. She had encountered this attitude before. A silent yet palpable underestimation, as though her presence in that courtroom was nothing more than an overreach. She wasn't offended. She was energized. Doubt was a familiar adversary, one she had bested time and time again. Sliding into her seat at the plaintiff's table, she carefully placed her leather-bound case file in front of her. Every movement was deliberate, exuding a quiet confidence that required no theatricality. Across from her, Charles Merritt straightened his silk tie. He was a relic of the old guard, late 50s, polished, seasoned, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. A man who had navigated the legal world not necessarily by merit, but by the weight of his name and the power of the circles he moved in. His suit was impeccable. His cufflinks gleamed under the dim courtroom lights, and the air of certainty around him was nearly suffocating. He didn't look at her. Not really. A brief flick of the eyes, a passing acknowledgement, as though he were glancing at a junior associate rather than opposing counsel. And then, just as quickly, his attention shifted to the judge. The picture of ease and confidence, as though this was merely another formality before a victory he had already claimed in his mind. The heavy wooden doors swung open once more. The jury filed in, a collection of men and women from different walks of life. Some looked alert and inquisitive. Others wore the dull expression of individuals already burdened by the weight of their daily lives. A few adjusted their glasses, some crossed their arms, and one man near the back rubbed his temple, as though already anticipating a headache. Pam took them in, not just their faces, but the nuances that spoke of their biases, their hesitations, their potential reactions. She didn't just see a jury, she saw a collection of stories. Some had likely been wronged before, some perhaps had trusted the system and been let down, and others still may have held a natural skepticism toward someone in her position. She was not here to play to their indifference. She was here to turn it into belief. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. "All rise." A ripple of movement filled the room as everyone stood. Judge Richard Calloway adjusted the sleeves of his robe before clearing his throat. He moved with the practiced ease of someone who had presided over countless cases, each one blending into the next. "Be seated," he said, his tone casual, almost dismissive, as though the entire proceeding was a minor inconvenience in his day. He shuffled his papers, barely sparing a glance at Pam before peering over the top of his glasses. "Miss Bondi," he said with the faintest air of amusement, "I trust you are ready to proceed?" Pam met his gaze without hesitation, her voice unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor." She saw it, the flicker of something unreadable in his expression. Perhaps surprise? Perhaps curiosity? But the smirk? It hadn't faded yet. That was fine. It would. The judge exhaled through his nose, a faint, almost imperceptible chuckle escaping before he caught himself. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting the position of his glasses as he glanced down at the bench. "Well," he muttered, barely suppressing his amusement, "let's hope this doesn't turn into a circus." His words, though spoken softly, carried through the courtroom. The microphone caught every syllable, ensuring that not only the attorneys, but the jury and the audience behind them heard it as well. A few members of the jury exchanged glances, some amused, some indifferent. One man, a balding accountant with tired eyes, shook his head slightly as if he had already made up his mind about the case. Another, a young woman in a navy blazer, pressed her lips into a thin line. Her gaze flickered toward Pam, assessing, measuring. Charles Merritt, the high-powered defense attorney hired at great expense by the corporate giant, smirked. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath his weight, and folded his arms across his chest. He was comfortable, relaxed, too relaxed. To him, this case was already in the bag. He had seen the way the judge looked at Pam. He had heard the subtle condescension in Calloway's tone, the quiet amusement in his voice. Merritt had been in courtrooms like this before, where the old boys' club reigned supreme, and he knew how these stories usually played out. Pam, however, did not react. She did not blink, did not frown, did not acknowledge the judge's words, nor the whispers rippling through the courtroom. Instead, she calmly opened her case file, the crisp rustling of papers the only sound she made. The weight of the moment settled around her, but she remained unmoved. She had been here before, facing doubt, condescension, smirks meant to belittle. This was not new. This was not unexpected. What was unexpected was what she was about to do next. With deliberate precision, she lifted a single page from her file and placed it on the podium before her. The motion was slow, intentional, measured. She could feel every eye in the room on her. The jury watched, waiting. The judge, despite himself, leaned forward an inch, as if suddenly curious. Even Merritt, who had moments ago looked so smug, arched an eyebrow. She took her time. She wanted them to wait, to wonder. Then she spoke. "Your Honor," she said, her voice as steady as iron, "since the court is concerned with keeping this case from becoming a spectacle, perhaps we should start by addressing the defense's repeated attempts to obfuscate evidence." Silence. The judge's smirk wavered. Merritt's confident posture stiffened. The jury, once distracted, now gave her their full attention. She slid the document forward. This is a transcript of an internal email exchange within Merritt's client's legal department. It explicitly details their strategy to suppress key information relevant to this case. Information that should have been disclosed in discovery. The judge frowned. He reached for the document, scanning the first few lines. His expression darkened as he flipped the page. The air in the courtroom shifted. Where there had been amusement, there was now something far heavier. The tension became palpable. Merritt leaned forward abruptly, his smirk entirely gone. "Objection!" Pam cut him off before he could finish. "Your Honor, if the defense would prefer to respond in writing, I have no issue submitting this as evidence for the record." The judge glanced from the document to Merritt, then back at Pam. His gaze, once skeptical, now held something else. Consideration. Perhaps even the first traces of respect. Pam didn't need validation. She didn't need approval. But she knew this moment meant something. The judge had no idea what was coming, but he was about to find out.